The kitchen burned with heat and tension as the dinner rush began. Every sound, the sizzling of pans, the sharp clicks of knives, and the shouts of waiters mixed into one storm of chaos. At the center of it all stood the chef, a man once celebrated for his talent and creativity, now weighed down by the crushing pressure of perfection. Tonight was not just another night. A famous food critic was coming, and one bad review could destroy everything he had built. His white coat was stained with sweat, his eyes sharp with focus, yet behind that steady stare, fear lived quietly. Orders flew in faster than he could breathe, each one a ticking clock. "Move faster," he barked, but even his own voice sounded distant, trembling under the noise. The staff worked like soldiers, but the energy was different. Everyone felt the pressure in the air. Pots clanged, plates cracked, and time seemed to move too fast and too slow at once. The chef's hands moved automatically, slicing, seasoning, plating. Yet his mind kept drifting to the critic's table that would soon be filled. He imagined the cold stare, the silent bite, and the single pen stroke that could end his career. Years ago, cooking had been his joy. He used to smile while tasting a new sauce or creating something no one had tried before. Now, it felt like survival. Every dish was a test, every night a war. The flame on the stove flared higher, almost mocking him. "Stay focused," he whispered to himself, but his pulse was racing. The sous chef asked a question, a waiter dropped a plate, and for a second, everything around him blurred. He could feel his control slipping like grains of salt between his fingers. The restaurant's soft music couldn't hide the rising tension from the dining hall. Even the guests could sense something electric in the air. Sweat rolled down his temple as he tasted a sauce that wasn't quite right. Again, he snapped, throwing the pan aside. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, then chaos began again. He looked around. The young cooks were nervous. The waiters avoided eye contact, and the clock on the wall seemed louder than ever. Deep inside, he knew this night could define him. One dish wrong, one mistake too many, and years of hard work would vanish. His dream restaurant, his name, his pride all on the line. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside, but the fear didn't leave. Instead, it sat heavy on his chest, whispering doubts he tried not to hear. The critic would be here any minute, and he wasn't ready, not really. The chef's heart thudded in his chest as he looked at his team and the chaos around them. He had built this kitchen to be his kingdom, but tonight it felt like a battlefield, and he wasn't sure if he was leading it or slowly losing it. The moment it happened, time seemed to stop. The sharp hiss of the pan turned into a low, bitter crackle, and a faint trail of smoke rose into the air. The chef turned his head too late. The golden sauce had turned dark, the meat to crisp, the edges blackening. For a single second, no one spoke. Then the smell hit, burnt, sharp, unmistakable. It was the restaurant's signature entree, the dish that carried his name, the one the food critic had specifically requested. A silence spread through the kitchen that was louder than any shout. The line cooks froze, their hands halfway to plates. The sous chef's face paled. Even the dishwasher in the back stopped moving, his eyes locked on the chef. The sound of sizzling felt like mockery now. The chef stood there, staring at the pan, his hands trembling slightly. He'd burned dishes before, every cook had, but never like this, not tonight. His chest tightened as the weight of what just happened sank in. One mistake, one slip in focus, and everything could crumble. He reached for another pan with shaking hands, trying to recover, but the damage was already done. The burnt scent filled the air, curling under the doors, and he could almost imagine the critic smelling it from the dining room. "Out! Throw it out!" he barked, but his voice cracked mid-command. His team moved fast, replacing ingredients, cleaning the counter, pretending it wasn't a disaster, but everyone knew it was. He could feel their eyes on him, full of worry. He was always the calm one, the man who turned chaos into art. But now his face was pale, his jaw tight, and his breathing uneven. For the first time he looked lost. The head waiter entered quietly, whispering that the critic was waiting, and the chef felt his stomach drop. He turned away, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles went white. A small tremor ran through his hand, the kind that comes not from fear of failure, but from the deep, painful realization that failure might already be here. He muttered to himself, "It's just one dish," trying to sound steady, but his mind screamed louder. It wasn't just one dish. It was the dish. The one he had perfected over years. The one that made him who he was. And now, it lay in the trash, blackened and smoking. His team waited for him to give an order, to do something, anything. But for a few seconds, he couldn't move. The kitchen, usually alive with energy and noise, now felt cold and hollow. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then, slowly, he lifted his head, his eyes burning not from smoke, but from the weight of everything he stood to lose. The critic was waiting, the world outside was watching, and inside this kitchen, a man who had once been unstoppable was standing on the edge of breaking. The moment the smell of the burnt dish filled the air, something inside the chef snapped. His jaw tightened, his chest felt heavy, and before anyone could speak, his hand shot out. The towel he'd been holding hit the counter with a sharp slap. "Enough," he shouted, the sound echoing through the kitchen like a thunderclap. Everyone froze. The line cooks, the waitstaff, even the dishwasher in the back, all stopped and stared. For years, they had seen him calm under pressure, patient even during chaos. But tonight was different. He wasn't the unshakable chef they admired. He was a man cornered by his own perfection. He turned toward the stove, eyes locked on the blackened pan, his lips pressed into a hard line. "How could I let this happen?" he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for others to hear. His sous chef tried to speak, to offer a solution, but he cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking slightly. He looked around, the young cooks staring at him with wide eyes, their faces pale with uncertainty. And then he saw it, pity. That soft, quiet pity that burned worse than anger. He hated it. His throat tightened as he turned away, running a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. The noise of the kitchen seemed to fade. No sizzling pans, no clinking plates, just the faint hum of the overhead lights and the sound of his own heartbeat. He had given everything to this place. Every scar on his hand, every sleepless night, every missed celebration and forgotten birthday, all for this restaurant, for perfection. And now, because of one mistake, it all felt meaningless. He slammed his hand against the counter, the sound sharp and final. "What's the point?" he whispered to himself. The thought scared him. For a fleeting second, he imagined walking out, leaving the kitchen, the restaurant, the endless pressure, just disappearing into the night where no one knew his name. His chest ached at the thought of freedom, yet guilt followed right behind. He looked up at the reflection on the steel hood above the stove. His own face stared back, tired, worn, and defeated. The man who once lived for flavor and creativity now looked like a stranger lost in his own kitchen. He turned toward the door, his steps heavy, his breath shaky. One of his cooks tried to stop him, saying his name softly, but he didn't respond. The walls felt too small, the air too thick. He needed to breathe. He pushed through the swinging door into the quiet hallway beyond, his footsteps echoing against the tiles. Behind him, the kitchen stood still, as if holding its breath. For the first time, the man who built his entire world around food wasn't thinking about the next dish, or the next critic, or the next dream. He was just thinking about escape, from the fire, from the noise, and maybe even from himself. The chef sat on the cold floor of the back room, his back against the wall, his hands covering his face. The sounds of the kitchen, the shouting, the clatter of pots, the nervous whispers were faint now, like distant echoes. His chest rose and fell heavily as he tried to steady his breathing. For years, this kitchen had been his kingdom, and now it felt like a battlefield he'd lost. The smell of burnt food still clung to his clothes, a bitter reminder of failure. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there, but when he finally lowered his hands, he saw someone standing in the doorway. It was one of the youngest waitresses, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of worker who was often overlooked but never complained. She stood there, holding a cracked plate in her trembling hands, not daring to step closer at first. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair slightly messy from the dinner rush, yet her eyes held something the chef hadn't seen all night: understanding. She looked at him for a long moment before finally saying, in a gentle voice, "You taught me that food is emotion, not perfection." The words hit him harder than he expected. He blinked, staring at her, unsure what to say. She stepped closer, setting the broken plate beside him. "You told us that once," she continued softly, "when I messed up an order on my first day. You said a dish doesn't have to look perfect. It just has to mean something to the person who eats it." Her tone wasn't scolding or comforting. It was steady, honest. He looked down at the floor, memories flooding back. The day he said those very words to inspire his team. Back then, he truly believed them. But somewhere along the way, he had lost that truth under the weight of pressure, fame, and fear of failure. The waitress crouched beside him now, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone in that kitchen looks up to you. They don't care about the critic out there. They care about you." Her words cut through the noise in his mind, quieting the storm of self. He lifted his head, studying her face. There was no judgment, no pity, just sincerity. For the first time that night, he felt seen not as a chef, but as a human being. The moment stretched between them, fragile and real. He gave a small, tired smile. "Emotion, not perfection," he repeated under his breath, as if tasting the words again for the first time. The waitress nodded, her lips curving into a small, hopeful smile. She stood and held out a hand to him. "They're waiting for you," she said simply. The chef hesitated, then reached up and took her hand. As he rose to his feet, the heaviness in his chest didn't vanish completely, but it lightened. The kitchen was still chaotic, the critic still waiting, the pressure still real. But now, something had shifted inside him. For the first time that night, he remembered why he started cooking in the first place, not to impress, but to connect. And that one reminder, spoken softly by a waitress, began to change everything. The chef stood beside the waitress in the dim light of the kitchen, his heart still heavy but his eyes searching for something, a way to fix what seemed impossible. The ruined dish sat between them on the counter, its once golden surface now darkened and brittle. To him, it looked like proof of failure, but to her, it seemed like a chance for rebirth. The young waitress rolled up her sleeves, her movements calm and unhurried. So different from the frantic rhythm of the kitchen moments ago. "It's not about fixing it," she said quietly, picking up a handful of fresh herbs and crushing them gently between her fingers. The smell filled the air, sharp, alive, forgiving. "It's about making it real." The chef watched, uncertain. "Real," he repeated, his voice low and doubtful. She nodded and began working, her hands moving without a recipe or plan. She scraped away the burnt edges, revealing the flavor beneath, then added a touch of lemon, a drizzle of honey, and something unexpected: roasted garlic from a leftover pan. "Cooking," she said softly, "is like life. Sometimes it burns. You can't undo it, but you can turn it into something new." Her tone carried no arrogance, only quiet confidence. He couldn't help but be drawn in by the simplicity of her approach. For years, he had followed rules, measured every second, plated everything perfectly. But watching her now, he realized she wasn't thinking about perfection. She was thinking about feeling. He reached for a spoon, tasting a bit of what she had made. The flavors surprised him, smoky, sweet, and deeply human. It wasn't flawless, but it was real. It tasted like struggle and recovery, like mistakes turned into meaning. The chef's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time that night, something sparked within him curiosity. "Show me," he said, his voice steady but soft. She smiled faintly, sliding a pan toward him. Together, they began to rebuild the dish, not by recipe, but by instinct. He added what felt right, not what was expected. A bit of cream to soften the burn, a hint of herbs to awaken the senses. Every step became less about pressure and more about rediscovery. The staff nearby watched quietly, sensing the shift in the air. The kitchen that had been filled with panic now buzzed with cautious hope. As the chef plated the final dish, he noticed the difference. It wasn't the same entree he had planned, but it had something his old version lacked: soul. The waitress stepped back, wiping her hands, her eyes meeting his. "Sometimes," she said, "the secret isn't in the recipe. It's in the courage to start again." He didn't answer right away, but inside, he felt something heal. For years, he had chased perfection. Tonight, he had rediscovered purpose. The ruined dish wasn't his downfall, it was his beginning. The chef stood shoulder to shoulder with the young waitress. Their eyes focused on the burnt dish that had moments ago felt like the end of his world, yet now looked like the beginning of something entirely new. The kitchen had grown quieter, the clatter of pans and shouts replaced by the rhythmic movements of two people working in harmony, their energy calm but purposeful. He picked up ingredients not because a recipe demanded it, but because his instincts told him they belonged. A pinch of spice here, a drizzle of sauce there, guided not by rules, but by memory, emotion, and feeling. The waitress watched him closely, offering a nod or a small suggestion now and then, but mostly letting him rediscover the rhythm that had once fueled his passion. Each step of rebuilding the dish became a journey, peeling away layers of doubt and fear, revealing flavors hidden beneath the burnt exterior. Flavors that spoke of patience, resilience, and honesty. The chef noticed the change in himself with each motion. The tension in his shoulders eased, his hands steadied, and a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He remembered the first time he had fallen in love with cooking, the way a simple meal could bring joy to someone's face, the way aromas could evoke memories, the way flavor could communicate without words. Tonight, he realized, wasn't about impressing critics or achieving perfection. It was about connection, about giving something of himself in every stir, every sprinkle, every carefully placed garnish. The dish, once ruined and unrecognizable, began to transform under their hands into something alive, imperfect, yes, but honest, vibrant, and evocative. The chef paused briefly to taste, his eyes closing as the complex mix of textures and flavors hit him, smoky yet sweet, bold yet gentle, and full of the kind of human emotion that no technical skill alone could produce. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly, a genuine smile that had been absent for far too long, and the waitress smiled back, understanding that the lesson had been more than culinary. It was life itself. Around them, the kitchen staff watched in awe, seeing a man who had been on the brink of collapse, rediscovering his purpose and his spirit. Each addition to the dish was a statement, a rejection of fear, a declaration of courage, and a reminder of the reason he had chosen this path: to create, to nourish, to share. By the time they finished, the plate held not just food, but a story of struggle, redemption, and authenticity. The chef stepped back, wiping his hands and breathing deeply, feeling a quiet pride that had nothing to do with awards and everything to do with self-respect and rediscovered passion. He looked at the waitress, eyes glistening, and said softly, "I remember why I started," and in that simple acknowledgement, he felt a weight lift, replaced by clarity, purpose, and the comforting knowledge that his career, his life, and his heart had been renewed, all because he had allowed himself to cook from the soul, not from expectation. The moment had arrived, and the restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the freshly reinvented dish was carried to the critic's table, its aroma weaving through the dining room and capturing the attention of every patron. In the kitchen, the chef stood silently, hands clasped, heart pounding in a rhythm that seemed to echo off the stainless steel walls, unsure if this single plate would mark the end of his career or the start of a new chapter. Every second stretched, every clink of cutlery and soft murmur from the diners magnified in his mind as he pictured the critic lifting a fork, tasting, and then passing judgment. The waitress remained at his side, calm and composed, her presence a quiet anchor amid the storm of anxiety swirling around him. She had confidence, not because the dish was flawless, but because it was real, a dish forged from honesty, emotion, and shared determination, carrying not just ingredients, but the story of the chef's rediscovery, the nights of despair, the gentle guidance she had offered, and the courage to start again. The chef's eyes flicked to her occasionally, drawing courage from her steady gaze, knowing that this wasn't merely about flavors or plating, but about revealing a piece of himself through the medium of food. Meanwhile, the critic, renowned for sharp words and harsh critiques, leaned forward, fork poised above the plate, eyes narrowing as the first bite was taken. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint rustle of napkins or the soft sip of water, as if the restaurant itself waited in anticipation. The chef felt a strange mix of fear and hope, every nerve alive, every memory of failure and triumph converging into this single, fragile moment. He noticed diners subtly leaning in, captivated by the tension, sensing that what was happening went beyond food, that this plate held human vulnerability and resilience in a way they rarely experienced. The waitress's hand lightly rested on his shoulder, a simple gesture that reminded him to breathe, to trust in the journey they had shared, to understand that the truth in the dish mattered more than perfection or approval. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the critic's expression began to change. The rigid skepticism melted into intrigue, then into something softer, perhaps recognition of the human effort, the passion, and the risk behind each carefully placed ingredient. The chef dared not exhale, not wanting to break the spell of that moment, feeling the weight of years of pressure, sacrifice, and doubt pressing down and lifting all at once. And as the critic's fork paused, hovering over the plate for the second taste, the chef realized something profound. Whether this night ended in praise or criticism, he had already reclaimed something far more important, the joy of creating with authenticity, the humility to accept guidance, and the courage to reveal his soul in every dish. The room remained tense, yet expectant, every eye following the critic's next move, and the chef, standing in the quiet of the kitchen, beside the calm and confident waitress, understood that this was more than a presentation. It was the culmination of redemption, learning, and the quiet triumph of heart over fear. The fork hovered just above the plate, the critic's eyes narrowing in concentration as the first bite approached his lips, and the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, the usual clatter of cutlery and soft conversations vanishing as though swallowed by the tension that had filled the room since the dish was served. In the kitchen, the chef stood motionless, barely daring to breathe, his heart hammering in his chest with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief, while the waitress, calm and steady, silently reminded him that the journey mattered more than the outcome, that the plate carried the story of their shared effort, the nights of panic, the guidance given, and the courage to start again. As the bite touched the critic's tongue, time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an eternity. The chef's mind raced, recalling the burnt entree that had once threatened to ruin everything, the outburst of frustration, and the quiet wisdom of the waitress who had shown him that perfection was not the goal, but honesty and emotion were. For a moment, there was only stillness, an almost unbearable silence as the critic's expression remained unreadable, his fork paused in midair, and the weight of the entire restaurant's attention pressed down on the chef like a physical force. Every pair of eyes turned toward the table, diners leaning forward, sensing that this moment was larger than food, that it carried human vulnerability, creativity, and the courage to transform failure into something extraordinary. Then, almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift occurred in the critic's gaze. His lips curved into a faint nod, the first acknowledgement of approval, followed by another careful bite, as if testing the depth of flavor and the honesty behind it. Slowly, a smile broke across his face, small at first, then widening, and in that instant, the tension in the room dissolved like mist, replaced by a collective exhale from every patron, a shared relief and admiration. The chef's knees nearly gave way, his shoulders sagging as a flood of emotion hit him, relief, gratitude, and a profound sense of accomplishment, while the waitress's quiet smile mirrored the pride and satisfaction she felt in seeing the boy she had guided reclaim his passion and talent. Whispers of praise began to ripple through the dining area, diners commenting on the unusual beauty of the dish, its imperfections that somehow made it perfect, and its depth of emotion that transcended tastes alone. The critic spoke at last, his voice carrying through the restaurant with calm authority, describing the dish not merely as food but as a story of human resilience, creativity, and authenticity, praising its raw honesty and emotional depth in words that resonated far beyond the plate itself. The chef, still in awe, realized that what had once been a devastating mistake had transformed into the highlight of the night, a moment that would be remembered not for disaster, but for courage, collaboration, and the power of heart over fear. And in that instant, he understood the true meaning of success, not perfection, but the ability to create something real, something that moved people, and something that would linger in memory long after the last bite was taken. The kitchen was quiet now, the night outside holding a stillness that seemed to wrap around the restaurant like a soft blanket, and the chef sat alone at a small table in the corner, his hands clasped together, fingers trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the evening, his mind replaying every moment with a mix of disbelief and wonder. He thought about the disaster that had started it all, the burnt dish that had threatened to shatter his reputation, the panic and frustration that had nearly made him give up, and the weight of years of expectation pressing down on him like an invisible hand, reminding him that one mistake could undo everything he had worked for. Yet, now, in the calm after the storm, he realized that it hadn't been luck that had saved the night, nor the critic's leniency, nor even his own skill alone. It had been something deeper, something uniquely human, the courage to fail, the courage to feel, and the courage to begin again. He remembered the quiet strength of the waitress, standing beside him in that tense moment, showing him that imperfection could be transformed into something meaningful, that emotion could elevate a dish beyond the technical and the expected, that heart mattered more than precision. Every ingredient they had added, every adjustment made in the heat of crisis, had carried with it a story of humility, trust, and collaboration, and the chef felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, not just for the outcome, but for the reminder that he had lost sight of what truly drove him, what had first drawn him to cooking, long before fame and awards became the measure of success. He thought about the diners, the critic, the faces of the staff who had watched him falter and then rise again, and he understood that what had been created tonight was more than a dish. It was a testament to resilience, creativity, and the human spirit's ability to turn failure into triumph. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the exhaustion of the day, yet also a profound peace, because he knew that he had been reminded of who he truly was, not a chef defined by perfection, but by passion, by heart, and by the willingness to embrace every challenge, to risk, to experiment, and to keep moving forward, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. The silence of the kitchen felt full now, alive with the lessons learned, and he whispered a quiet thanks to the waitress, not merely for saving the dish, but for showing him that success is measured not by accolades, but by courage, authenticity, and the refusal to let fear define one's choices. In that moment, the chef realized that the story of tonight, the breakdown, the guidance, the reinvention, and the eventual triumph was something he would carry with him forever, a reminder that the essence of humanity lies in its ability to rise, to adapt, and to create meaning even from the ashes of mistakes, and that it is in these moments of vulnerability and courage that true greatness is born. Long after the lights of the restaurant dim and the applause fades away, months after that unforgettable night, the story of the chef and the burnt dish had traveled far beyond the walls of his restaurant, spreading across social media, blogs, and news outlets under headlines like "The Chef Who Found His Soul in a Burnt Dish," capturing the hearts of thousands who read about the fear, frustration, and ultimate triumph that had unfolded in the heat of a kitchen crisis. The tale resonated not only with aspiring chefs, but with anyone who had faced failure and felt the weight of expectations pressing down on them, because it was more than a story about cooking. It was a story about courage, resilience, and the power of human emotion to transform a moment of disaster into something unforgettable. Culinary schools began including the incident in their lessons, teaching students that a perfect dish on the plate is not always as important as the story, the intention, and the emotion behind it. And they shared how the chef had been humbled by a simple, perceptive waitress who reminded him that food was not merely a technical accomplishment, but an expression of the heart. Meanwhile, the chef's own life changed in ways he had never anticipated. He was no longer just a figure in a high-pressure kitchen trying to meet critics' standards. He became a mentor, a storyteller, and a living example of how vulnerability and creativity could coexist with skill. In every kitchen he led afterward, he made it a point to share his lesson with every member of his team, young and old, novice and expert, repeating the same words with quiet conviction. Perfection feeds the eyes, but emotion feeds the heart, reminding them that the essence of cooking, and perhaps life itself, lies in the courage to take risks, the humility to learn from mistakes, and the generosity to trust others in moments of weakness. As new chefs watched him demonstrate dishes, sometimes flubbing a step or improvising an ingredient, they saw not failure, but the beauty of honesty and adaptation. And the atmosphere of his kitchens changed, less rigid, more open, more alive with curiosity and emotion. Articles, videos, and interviews shared the story again and again, showing that the chef's breakthrough was not just about a single dish being saved, but about a mindset that could turn pressure into creativity, mistakes into opportunity, and fear into confidence. Even strangers, who had never set foot in his restaurant, were inspired to approach their own work and lives differently, finding courage to take bold steps, to trust their instincts, and to recognize that imperfection carries its own kind of beauty. Over time, the legacy of that night became a touchstone for anyone seeking to do meaningful work, to create something from the heart, and to rise after setbacks. And the chef, though humbled by all the attention, quietly continued his routine, cooking not for fame or accolades but for the love of the craft and for the moments when a simple dish could connect with someone's soul, proving that one night, one burnt dish, and one courageous act could leave a ripple of inspiration that would echo far beyond the kitchen, across the world, and into the hearts of anyone willing to listen, learn, and embrace the imperfect but profoundly human process of creating with love and passion.